everybody, I'm Mike, and this is Bubba's Workbench. So today on Tool Tip Tuesday, I want to talk about protecting your metal surfaces. And in this case, it was mainly about protecting my welding table. Since in my shop at the moment, it serves dual duty. He said duty. So in my shop, it serves a dual purpose, and I keep a piece of plywood on top of this most of the time till I go into what I refer to as metalworking mode. And so when I took the wood off this previous time, because it had been on for so long I haven't done any metal projects, it wasn't per se had a layer of rust, but it did kind of have a funky smell, and it was a rusty top to begin with, but I have cleaned it many times, so I thought it was clean enough. So I decided, you know what, I've got some extra beeswax. I'm gonna go ahead and coat this whole thing. I'm in a bit of a damp environment, and when that dryer is on, it puts so much moisture into here. So I find that I have to be extra careful on a lot of my tools. I went ahead and did the process of coating this with my little Harbor Freight torch. If you haven't seen that video on my hit or miss, make sure you check that out. So basically all I did was chop up a bunch of beeswax and kind of try to get a nice light coating over the whole area, just so then that way when I went by with a torch and a brush, I could just heat up the beeswax and just keep slowly moving around until I knew I had a really good coating. But one of the bigger points of this video, since there really is no per se skill involved in doing this, you just melt the wax and there you go. Now what I did is I wanted to have a pretty smooth finish, and when you melt the wax you end up with little ridges, this and that. So I had a little technique I did where I would scrape off, or just kind of level it out is a better term to use. Level it out the top so that when it cooled it was just a nice thin little layer on there. But then you end up with all of this beeswax scrap, garbage, trash, whatever you want to call it. So what I did is I came up with this idea that, hey, I know what. I collected all of the stuff I scraped off, put it onto a little tray. With some boiled linseed oil, I made what I'm referring to as a shot paste. But it's not going to be of a very good quality. It's definitely not food safe. Regardless, it wouldn't be food safe because of the nature of that particular boiled linseed oil I use. It has driers in there. But because there would also be a lot of particulates from the process, since, you know, it might have lifted some paint. You can see there's paint on this table, maybe even some little pieces of metal, who knows. So I actually filter the melted oil. I'm a big fan of nothing goes to waste. Bit of a hoarder in that respect. I beeswaxed the table, but then all of that scrap became useful for other things. So let's see how I did all this. Okay, so since I lost some of the footage earlier on what I refer to as finish the surface after I've applied the beeswax, I decided to repeat the process with a little mini mock-up of my welding table. First, clean the metal properly. What I like to do is go over with a good degreaser to first get as much chemicals or anything off of the surface, including rust, that I can, and then I usually follow it up with Windex. Now, ultimately, if you've got mineral spirits, just do that, and that's all you need. That's my favorite thing, but I happen to be out of it. I go through it so quickly. Mineral spirits is a good idea for cleaning steel. It does an awesome job. So, we've cleaned our steel. Next, we got to get our beeswax and chop it up enough to cover this whole surface. And you don't really need that much. Okay, now here comes the finishing process, as I call it. Get yourself a squeegee. This one's not a rigid, it's a pretty stiff plastic one. So what we're going to do is we're just going to try to even this out. As you can see, all of the waves and whatever, it's going to be a pretty rough surface. A lot of extra stuff we don't need in here. So what I do is I just go across, and you can start off being flatter, but what I find is you end up wanting to be kind of straight, and we're just going to kind of keep going back and forth and scrape the surface here. And then what might eventually happen, depending on how hard it is you can scrape like this. Just don't push too hard. We're not trying to take it off. What we're doing basically is I want to level out the surface. So we're just going to take off what we don't need, just all the high spots. But we're trying to take off as little as possible to achieve that effect. You know, it's not that critical or crucial. This is just how I do it. That seems to yield me the best results. Okay. So now, obviously, because this is such a small piece, we don't have that much left over, but don't throw this away. I have the collection from the full table, and we're going to add this to that. Okay, we got our mad scientist lab set up here. Okay, so let's get this fired up. Oops. Now what I like to do too, I have this big mason jar here, is I also like to put a paper towel in the bottom of the pan, and then that way it keeps the glass, gives it a little barrier so that you don't have glass on the metal touching. This wax should melt pretty quickly. Okay, well, we'll go with that. Ratio is kind of screwy. We'll see how it turns out. It's so hard to tell. When everything's in a liquid, you don't know how firm it's going to be at the end. I want it to be more of a paste, and I'm not 100% sure that will be the result, but we'll see. It was about, what did I say, 3/4 of a cup of beeswax, and I used a full cup of boiled linseed oil. So this is clearly not food safe. Boiled linseed has drying agents in there. And I know most everything they claim, once cured, is food safe. But I will iterate that I do not believe this is food safe in any way, shape, or form. That's my disclaimer. Okay, I'm not sure what you missed in the last part. My phone, unfortunately, always cuts out after 10 minutes. Okay, I think that's good right there. I'm going to cut that off. And I know I was talking about boiled linseed oil and how dangerous it can be if you're trying to make your own. So let's see what kind of results we get out of this batch. extremely careful at this point because water is boiling hot. Okay, and I'm glad I did that, as I told you with the screen. Look at all the little goodies that ended up being in there. So there we have it. Now we gotta let this cool and see what we get. So through the magic of video editing, oh, that didn't work. Okay, well, come back in a little bit and this should be done. Okay, well, I'm going to clean up all this mess before the little woman gets home and finds out I had one of her precious copper bottom pans out here in the garage. So I've got to get that back in the house, safe and sound. And so I'll meet you back in the kitchen and we'll bring these in there. And hopefully these are, they're getting solid pretty quick there. I may go ahead and throw them into the fridge. You know, you can put them in the refrigerator, the freezer. I mean, like most things, I've always felt that it's best to let things just cool on their own. I think it gives a more even final product if you let it air cool. Because what can happen is if you stick this in the fridge, then depending on how it's sitting and where the air is hitting, you could get unevenness as far as where it's cooling, and you know, that's just my theory. But in any case, okay, guys. All right, we're back. There's our jars of BLO and beeswax. Beeswax and BLO. So, all right, let's see how it turned out. Not the most attractive in there, but let's see how it came out. Oh, it's soft, all right. Kind of got a applesauce consistency, maybe a little bit thicker. Okay, let's try that again. I don't really have anything to test this on, so I just kind of grabbed something I had, one of my jigs, my prototypes, and just what the hey, you know? Okay, so I wasn't happy with the formulation, so I went back and redid it, and let's see how it turned out. It visually looks like it did a better job, a little more thicker. Yeah, a little bit runny for my taste. I'm wondering why I have this rug here. I had a bit of a mishap in the house and ended up spilling it all over the carpet, and oh god, it's whole. Better not get into that. So it definitely looks like a lot more pasty. Let's see. Yeah, I think that's a lot better. Yeah, it's still really soft. And what's kind of interesting is there's a heck of a lot of, well, I think I actually have more beeswax than I put oil. So I may have to experiment with this a little bit. I'm wondering if, I don't know this or not, so I'm just kind of guessing if maybe being that this is the boiled linseed you buy off the shelf at pretty much anywhere, you know, which contains driers and whatnot, if by some chance that's why it seems to be runnier, where you would quite possibly need less than, you know, the ratios of